What pushes a woman to the absolute edge? For Chicago, it wasn't just the sting of betrayal from the man who promised her forever. It wasn't just the eviction notice on her door while she carried his child. It was the crushing silence, the cold realization that to him, she and their unborn son were a dirty secret to be erased. So when the city's elite gathered to celebrate millionaire Irene's birthday, she decided to give him a gift he couldn't refuse, delivered in front of the world. This is the story of how one woman, armed with nothing but the truth, gate-crashed the party of the year to serve a cold dish of revenge right on his birthday cake. The silence in Chicago's small fourth-floor walk-up apartment was a physical presence. It was heavier than the humid Saigon air that seeped through the louvered windows, thicker than the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of afternoon sun. Her gaze was fixed not on the vibrant street scene below, but on the crisp, cruel white of the eviction notice lying on her small wooden table. It was the third and final one. The words blurred, but their meaning screamed at her: failure, destitution, homelessness. Her hand rested instinctively on the firm, round swell of her belly, a silent promise to the life within that she would not let them fail. He was all she had left. Just 6 months ago, her world had been a kaleidoscope of impossible, brilliant colors. She was a gifted, if unknown, lacquer artist, struggling to make a name for herself in New York's burgeoning art scene. Her hands, usually stained with resin and shell powder, had found themselves held in the soft, manicured grip of Tristan Adrew. He was a titan of industry, a real estate mogul whose face graced the covers of business magazines, and whose family name was synonymous with dynastic wealth and power. He hadn't just walked into the small gallery showcasing her work. He had conquered it. Tristan didn't just see art. He saw potential assets and beauty he could possess. He bought her entire collection of 4 paintings, not with a sterile credit card, but with a gaze that made her feel more valuable than any piece on the wall. He had been utterly intoxicating. He'd spoken of her talent in a way that made her believe in herself, using words like visionary and prodigy. Their romance was a whirlwind, a fantasy plucked from a movie screen. He'd whisked her away from her cramped apartment to the penthouse suite of the landmark 81 tower, where the city sprawled beneath them like a carpet of scattered jewels. He'd introduced her to a world of bespoke tailoring 9-course meals and the casual, effortless confidence that only comes with obscene wealth. He loved her passion, he'd said, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about mixing traditional Cern Aurélie techniques with modern abstracts. He'd commissioned a massive piece for the lobby of his new flagship hotel, the Celestia Grand. It was to be her masterpiece, the project that would launch her career into the stratosphere. Chicago, who had spent her life guarding her heart, fell completely and irrevocably. She wasn't naive. She knew the chasm between their worlds was vast. But in his arms, under the soft glow of 1,000 city lights, he had made her believe they could build a bridge. He spoke of a future, of a life where her art and his ambition would create a new legacy. He never spoke of marriage, not explicitly, but his promises were a silken web she had willingly wrapped herself in. The first crack in their perfect world was a thin blue line on a plastic stick. She was pregnant. Chicago had been terrified, but a secret, thrilling joy had bloomed in her chest. A child, a piece of him, a piece of her, a living, breathing symbol of their love. When she told him, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement, his reaction was the first cold premonition of the end. There was no joy in his eyes, The warm, possessive gaze she adored was replaced by a cool, calculating assessment. The smile on his face was a strained, hollow thing. "Well," he'd said, his voice unnaturally level, "we'll have to handle this. Handle this." Chicago had repeated the beautiful bubble of her happiness, instantly bursting. He'd paced the length of the marble-floored penthouse, not looking at her. He spoke of his family, of expectations, of a 5-year business plan that was at a critical juncture. He mentioned a name she'd only seen in society pages, Isabel Lee, the daughter of a rival conglomerate's chairman. An important alliance, he'd called it. Not a romance, a merger. The conversation was a blur of corporate jargon and veiled dismissals. He told her not to worry, that he would take care of everything. The next day he was gone, on an urgent business trip to Singapore. The calls became shorter, the texts less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. The final fatal blow wasn't delivered by Tristan, but by a man in a tailored grey suit who introduced himself as Mr. Arlo, head of personal security for the Adru Corporation. He'd met her at a neutral cafe, his face impassive, his eyes holding a hint of what might have been pity or perhaps just professional detachment. He slid a bank-certified check across the table. It was for 5 billion Vietnamese dong, a staggering sum that was meant to buy her silence, her compliance, her disappearance. With it was a non-disclosure agreement, a thick legal document that would in essence erase her entire existence from Tristan's life. It stipulated that she could never contact him, his family, or his associates again. It forbade her from ever mentioning his name in connection with her or the situation. "Mr. Adru wishes you the best in your future endeavors." Mr. Arlo had said, his voice as sterile as the contract. "He believes this is the most dignified solution for everyone involved." Dignified. The word was a slap in the face. Chicago had stared at the check, a wave of nausea washing over her that had nothing to do with morning sickness. This was what she and her child were worth. A transaction. A problem to be solved with money. She had pushed the check and the papers back across the table, her hands shaking with a rage so profound it left no room for tears. "Tell him," she'd said, her voice low and dangerous, "that my child is not a business deal to be written off." Mr. Arlo had simply nodded, collected the documents, and left. The very next day, the commission for the Celestia Grand was cancelled, citing artistic differences. The gallery that had once championed her work suddenly had no space for her pieces. Her calls to Tristan's personal number went to a disconnected line. She had been excised from his life with surgical precision. Now, 3 months later, the money she had saved was gone, eaten away by rent, living expenses, and the initial doctor's visits for the baby. The eviction notice was the final proof of her utter isolation. Tristan hadn't just abandoned her. He had systematically dismantled her life, ensuring she had no foundation from which to fight back. As she stood there feeling the baby kick, a new feeling began to eclipse the despair. It was a hard, cold, and diamond-sharp resolve. He thought he could erase her. He thought money and power could silence the truth. But the truth was growing inside her, a living, breathing testament to his lies. He wanted a dignified solution. Fine. She would give him one. But it wouldn't be silent, and it wouldn't be private. It would be a spectacle. Her eyes fell upon a glossy magazine discarded on a nearby stool. The cover featured Tristan and a beautiful, poised woman, Isabel Lay. The headline read, "Billionaire Heir, Tristan Adru's extravagant 35th birthday, Gala." The society event of the year at the Reverie Saigon. A plan desperate and terrifying began to form in her mind. Tristan was building a fortress around his perfect life. She would not just knock on the door. She would become the Trojan horse walk straight through the gates and burn it all down from the inside. The decision once made settled in Chicago's soul like a block of ice. It chilled her fear, numbing the part of her that screamed about the risks, the humiliation, the sheer audacity of what she was about to do. Desperation was a powerful forge, and in it, her shame was hammered into a weapon. Her first move was strategic. Fighting the Adru family in a legal battle would be suicide. Their lawyers would bury her in motions and drain her of resources she didn't have. They would paint her as a gold-digging opportunist, and in the court of public opinion controlled by their vast media influence, she would be convicted before she ever spoke a word. No, her weapon couldn't be a lawsuit. It had to be undeniable, irrefutable, biological truth. With the last of her meaningful savings, a small fund she'd kept from a pre-Tristan commission, she made an appointment at a private international clinic. She paid for the most advanced, non-invasive prenatal paternity test. It required only a blood sample from her, and crucially, a discrete sample from the alleged father. This was her first major hurdle. Tristan was a phantom insulated by layers of security and wealth. But she remembered something. During their time together, he'd been an avid, almost obsessive golfer. He had a weekly game at the Tan Son Nhat golf course, a sanctuary for the city's elite. He also had a habit. After every game, he would drink a specific brand of imported electrolyte water, crushing the plastic bottle with a single aggressive twist of his hand, before tossing it into the bin next to the clubhouse shoe shine station. It was a small, arrogant display of strength. She called her only friend Aurelie. Aurelie was a pragmatist, a scooter-riding, street-smart accountant who had viewed Chicago's relationship with Tristan with deep suspicion from the start. "You want to do what?" Aurelie shrieked over the phone. "Go dumpster diving for a billionaire's backwash. Chicago, this is insane. He'll have you arrested for stalking and he won't even know I'm there." Chicago argued, her voice firm. "I just need the bottle, Aurelie. It's the only way." It took a week of convincing, but Aurelie, seeing the dark-rimmed desperation in her friend's eyes and the unyielding set of her jaw, finally agreed. The mission was absurdly tense. The two women, looking hopelessly out of place, loitered near the service entrance of the golf course. Chicago, now noticeably pregnant, stayed in the grab car, while Aurelie, feigning a lost tourist, managed to get close to the clubhouse. She watched as Tristan and his cohort finished their game, laughing and clapping each other on the back. She saw him drain the bottle of water and toss it exactly as Chicago had described, with her heart hammering. Aurelie waited until the group moved inside, then casually strolled over to the bin, dropped a napkin into it, and in the same motion retrieved the crushed plastic bottle. She was back in the car in less than 2 minutes, her face pale but triumphant. "If we get arrested, I'm blaming your unborn child's hormones," Aurelie panted, holding up the bottle like a holy relic. Chicago almost cried with relief. She carefully placed the bottle into a sterile bag. The next day, she dropped it off at the clinic. The lab technician, a professional and discreet woman, promised the results in 7 business days. An eoralial, she said, with a password-protected PDF attachment. 7 days. Chicago felt like a soldier waiting for a signal. In that time, she focused on the second phase of her plan infiltration. The Reverie Saigon was not just a hotel. It was a fortress of luxury, a vertical palace in the heart of District 1. The guest list for Tristan's gala would be scrutinized, the security airtight. Walking in the front door was impossible. Her mind raced back through the details Tristan had so proudly shared with her. He had boasted about the hotel's exclusivity, the Michelin-starred chefs, the bespoke event planning. And then she remembered it, a small detail he'd mentioned. The gala's catering wasn't being handled by the hotel's Aurélien kitchen, but by an external high-end catering company called L'Art de la Fête to accommodate a uniquely complex menu. This was her way in. Using a public computer at an internet cafe, she researched the company. They were hiring, not for chefs or managers, but for temporary event staff, servers, bussers, kitchen hands, the invisible army required to make such an event run smoothly. The pay was low, the hours were long, and the turnover was high. Perfect. She created a new sparse resume under a different name, Lynn, claiming previous waitressing experience at a mid-range restaurant that had recently closed down. She knew the risks. A background check could expose her, but she gambled on the likelihood that for a temporary low-level position, the company's HR would do the bare minimum. She was right. She got a call 2 days later. After a brief, perfunctory phone interview, she was told she had the job. Her shift was for Tristan's birthday gala. She was to report to the service entrance of the Reverie Saigon at 4 p.m. sharp. Uniform would be provided. "You're going to try and work a 10-hour shift as a waitress while 7 months pregnant?" Aurélie asked, her voice a mixture of awe and terror. "Chicago. Your feet will swell. You'll be exhausted. What if you drop something? What if someone recognizes you?" "They won't be looking for me amongst the serving staff," Chicago said, her voice steely. "The rich are experts at looking past the people who serve them. To them, I'll be invisible, and that's exactly what I need." The day before the gala, the Aurélien arrived. Her hands trembled as she typed the password "Son vous," a silly portmanteau of their names she had created in happier times. The irony was a bitter pill. The PDF loaded. Her eyes scanned past the legal jargon and laboratory accreditation seals, fixing on the final conclusive table. Analysis of submitted DNA samples. Alleged. Father Tristan, Adru sample from discarded item. Fetus. Sample from maternal blood. Result. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. Chicago stared at the numbers until they burned into her retina. 99.999%. A near-perfect certainty. It was the truth, codified and certified. It was her bomb. Now how to detonate it. Simply handing him the paper felt anticlimactic. Shouting it would be dismissed as hysterics. She needed a medium that was as grand and public as his betrayal. The centerpiece of any birthday party is the cake. Tristan's, she knew, would be an ostentatious, multi-tiered monstrosity, a monument to his own ego. That would be her canvas. Her plan solidified. She found a specialty bakery that printed custom images onto edible frosting sheets. She took a screenshot of the most crucial part of the DNA report, the header, the names, and the final damning percentage. She Aurélien it to the shop, paying online, and arranging for Aurélie to pick it up. "An edible DNA result," Aurélie said, her voice flat with disbelief when she arrived with the printed sugar sheet, sealed in a flat cardboard envelope. "You are truly a terrifying artist, my friend." Chicago took the envelope. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with the gravity of her intent. She now had the proof, the means of entry, and the method of delivery. All that was left was to walk into the lion's den. As she folded the simple black pants and white shirt of her uniform, she felt a profound and terrifying calm. She was no longer just Chicago, the heartbroken artist. She was a mother on a mission, and hell hath no fury like a woman fighting for her child. The service entrance of the Reverie Saigon was a world away from the opulent gold-leafed lobby that greeted its wealthy guests. Here in the concrete belly of the beast, the air was thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and cooking oil. It was a chaotic ballet of clattering trolleys, shouting chefs, and scurrying staff in functional sweat-wicking uniforms. Chicago, dressed in her simple black and white server's attire, blended in perfectly. The anonymity she had craved was now her shield. Her baby chose that moment to perform a series of energetic kicks as if sensing the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Chicago placed a hand on her stomach, a silent reassurance. "We can do this. Just a few more hours." The catering manager, a perpetually stressed-looking woman named Mrs. Quyen, barely glanced at her. She thrust a tray of champagne flutes into Chicago's hands. "Ballroom A, Oralian floor. Stick to the perimeter. Keep the glasses full. Don't engage with the guests unless spoken to. And for God's sake, don't drop anything." Carrying the tray was a challenge. Her lower back ached in protest, and her center of gravity was unfamiliar. But the physical discomfort was a welcome distraction from the storm raging in her mind. With every step she took through the swinging doors and into the grand ballroom, she felt like she was crossing a threshold into another dimension. The sheer scale of the opulence was breathtaking and nauseating. The room was a symphony of crystal gold and white orchids. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while the city's most powerful and beautiful people mingled their laughter like the clinking of ice in expensive crystal. They were peacocks in their natural habitat, draped in designer gowns and bespoke suits, their wrists he-Daniel, with watches that cost more than her parents' house. And there in the center of it all was him. Tristan Adrew was holding court, a magnetic sun around which all other bodies orbited. He looked impossibly handsome in a dark velvet tuxedo, a confident, easy smile on his face. At his side, her hand possessively on his arm, was Isabelle Le. She was stunning, a porcelain doll in a shimmering emerald gown that perfectly matched the massive rock on her left ring finger. An engagement ring. The sight of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from Chicago's lungs. The tabloids had speculated, but this was confirmation. He had replaced her, formalized his alliance, and built his future on the ashes of their past. Chicago forced herself to move, to melt into the background, as she'd been instructed. She moved along the edges of the room, her eyes scanning, observing. She was a ghost at this feast, Pridaniel. To the whispers and secrets hidden behind the glittering facade. "The La Family merger is a brilliant move," a portly man with a cigar said to his companion. "It solidifies the Adrew Empire for the next generation." "Tristan is ruthless," the other man replied with a chuckle. "Did you hear what he did to that small developer in Da Nang, bought the land right out from under him, and bled him dry in court? The man lost everything." Chicago's blood ran cold. This was the man she had loved. The man who had quoted poetry to her and praised the delicate grace of her brushstrokes. She was just another small developer to him, someone to be bled dry and discarded when she became an inconvenience. Her resolve hardened into granite. An hour into her shift, her feet were screaming. She found a momentary refuge in a small alcove behind a pillar, catching her breath. From here she had a clear view of the stage, where a jazz band was now playing. She also saw Mr. Arlo Tristan's head of security, his hawkish eyes sweeping the room with practiced vigilance. He was a walking symbol of the wall she had to breach. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Chicago's heart leaped into her throat. She immediately looked down, busying herself with rearranging the glasses on her tray, making herself small and insignificant. He looked away, his gaze passing over her, without a flicker of recognition. She was just part of the furniture. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. The evening wore on. Speeches were made. Tristan's father, a formidable old patriarch, with eyes as cold and hard as diamonds, spoke of legacy power and the bright future of the Adru-Lee alliance. He never once smiled. Then Isabel took the microphone. Her voice was smooth and cultured, but her words were daggers in Chicago's heart. "To my darling Tristan," she began, raising her glass, "the most driven, ambitious, and brilliant man I have ever known. He knows what he wants, and he is never afraid to do what is necessary to achieve it. He is building an empire, and I am so honored to be by his side as his future wife to build a family and a dynasty that will last for centuries. Happy birthday, my love." The crowd erupted in applause. Tristan kissed Isabel, a performative public sealing of their contract. Chicago felt a tear of pure rage slide down her cheek. Family dynasty. What about the family he had already started? The one growing in her womb, a life he was actively trying to pretend didn't exist. That was it. The last shred of her hesitation vanished. Her chance came when Mrs. Quien's frantic voice crackled over the small earpiece given to the staff. "Cake prep. I need 2 people in the West Corridor pantry now. The Oralian cake is coming up." Chicago moved instantly. She deposited her tray on a nearby service stand and hurried towards the designated corridor, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was her moment. The pantry was a small stainless steel room bustling with activity. And there it was, the cake. It was an architectural marvel, 5 tiers of perfect white fondant, adorned with intricate sugar work and delicate handcrafted gold leaf. It was a monument to wealth and ego, a pristine canvas. "You, Lynn," Mrs. Quien barked, pointing at Chicago. "Stand by. Once it's rolled out, your job is to stand with the pastry chef and hand him the ceremonial knife. Do not mess this up." Her hands were shaking as she took her position. The pastry chef, a proud, fussy man, was making last-minute adjustments. This was her window. The others in the pantry were focused on loading dessert trolleys. The chef was obsessed with his creation. No one was looking at her. With trembling fingers, Chicago reached into the inner pocket of her apron. She pulled out the flat cardboard envelope Aurelie had given her. Her hands were slick with sweat as she carefully slid out the edible frosting sheet. It was cool and slightly stiff. The black letters on the white sugar paper screamed up at her. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. The band in the ballroom struck up a familiar tune. "Happy birthday." The time was now. The chef gave a satisfied nod, and 2 waiters began to wheel the massive cake trolley towards the ballroom doors. Chicago fell into step beside them, the ceremonial knife on a small silver platter in one hand, the frosting sheet concealed in the other. As they pushed through the doors, a wave of applause and cheers washed over them. The lights in the ballroom dimmed and spotlights converged on the cake on Tristan and Isabel, who stood beaming beside it. Chicago's world narrowed to a tunnel. All she saw was Tristan's smiling face, a mask of happy ignorance. The voices of the crowd singing his praises faded into a dull roar. Her own heartbeat was the only sound she could hear. He did this, she thought, her steps firm, her purpose absolute. He made this necessary. They reached the center of the room. The pastry chef took his bow. Chicago stepped forward, holding the platter with the knife. Tristan turned to her, his eyes briefly flicking over her face. The server, the anonymous functionary. For a terrifying half-second, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Confusion. A ghost of a memory. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He reached for the knife, but Chicago didn't offer it to him. In one swift, deliberate movement, she dropped the knife. It clattered loudly onto the polished floor, the sound shockingly loud in the momentary silence after the song. Every eye flew to her, and in that sliver of time, that gasp of collective surprise, she acted. Before security could move, before Tristan could process what was happening, she took the edible DNA result, and with a movement that was both furious and precise, she unrolled it and slapped it down right across the pristine top tier of his magnificent birthday cake. The sugar sheet lay starkly against the white fondant. The bold black letters were unmistakable in the glare of the spotlights. Paternity test results alleged. Father Tristan. Adru. Probability of paternity 99%. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The silence that followed was more profound, more explosive than any noise. It was the sound of a perfectly constructed world shattering into a million pieces. For a long, stretched-out moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The only movement was the slight quiver of the sugar paper on the cake as the air conditioning whispered over it. The spotlights intended to illuminate a moment of celebration now served as a harsh interrogation lamp, pinning Tristan in their glare. His smile was frozen on his face, a grotesque rictus of shock. His eyes, wet and disbelieving, were fixed on the black and white declaration that had desecrated his perfect cake. Chicago stood her ground, her chin held high, her hand instinctively going to her belly. The fear she had anticipated was absent, replaced by an icy, empowering calm. She had thrown the bomb. Now she would watch it explode. Isabel was the first to react. Her perfectly painted lips parted in a silent "oh" of horror. Her eyes darted from the cake to Chicago, and a flicker of ugly recognition dawned in her expression. This was not just a random crazy person. This was a ghost from Tristan's past she had likely been assured was long gone. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, quickly swelling into a cacophony of frantic whispers, gasps, and the unmistakable clicking of phone cameras. The city's elite, so practiced in their poise, devolved into a mob of scandal-hungry gossips. This was juicier than any business merger, more shocking than any market fluctuation. This was real, raw human drama, and they were devouring it. Tristan finally broke his paralysis. His face, which had been pale with shock, was now flooding with a dark, furious red. His eyes lifted from the cake and locked onto Chicago's. The love she had once seen in them was replaced with a venomous hatred, so pure it was almost breathtaking. "What is the meaning of this?" he snarled, his voice low and shaking with rage, yet carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Who are you, security?" But Chicago spoke before security could reach her. Her voice wasn't a scream. It was clear, steady, and laden with the weight of months of pain. It cut through the noise like a shard of glass. "You know exactly who I am, Tristan," she said, her gaze unwavering. She took a small step closer, a gesture of defiance. "I'm the woman whose life you tried to erase with a check. The artist whose career you destroyed because she became an inconvenience." Her eyes flickered to Isabel, whose face was now a mask of cold fury. He told me your engagement was just an important alliance, a merger. It seems he tells everyone what they want to hear. Lies, Isabel hissed, finding her voice. She's a liar, Tristan. Get this trash out of here. But the proof was sitting on the cake, 99.999%. The number pulsed in the air, undeniable. Happy birthday, Tristan. Chicago continued, her voice ringing with a chilling finality. I didn't have 5 billion dong to buy you a gift, but I thought you should have this. The one thing you can't buy or sell or bully into disappearing. She pointed at the cake, then placed her hand firmly back on her stomach. This is your son. Meet your legacy. The word son was the final detonation. Chaos erupted. Tristan's father, the patriarch, looked as though he might have a stroke, his face purple with rage. He was shouting at Mr. Arlo, who was finally pushing his way through the stunned crowd. Isabel let out a strangled sob of fury and humiliation, turning on Tristan. You told me she was nobody, she shrieked, her carefully crafted composure shattering completely. You swore it was over, that it was handled. You let me stand up there and talk about our future, our family, while this was waiting. She ripped the enormous emerald ring from her finger and hurled it at his chest. It bounced off his velvet jacket and skittered across the floor. Forgotten. Tristan flinched as if he'd been struck. He was being attacked from all sides. His fiancée, his father, 100 pairs of judging eyes, and the calm, resolute gaze of the woman he had wronged. He was trapped, humiliated on the grandest stage he had ever built for himself. Mr. Arlo and another guard finally reached Chicago. They took her arms, their grip firm, but not brutal. They had failed in their duty to prevent the disaster, and now they were just doing damage control. Chicago didn't struggle. She had accomplished her mission. She held her head high as they escorted her through the gawking crowd. She could feel their stares, hear their whispers, a mixture of pity, contempt, and grudging admiration. As they passed the Adru family, she met the patriarch's eyes. The look he gave her was one of pure, unadulterated loathing. He saw her not as a person, but as a wrecker of dynasties. Her last sight as they pushed her through the service doors was of Tristan standing alone amidst the ruins of his party. His fists were clenched, his face a maelstrom of shame and fury. The magnificent cake, his symbol of success, was now a monument to his public disgrace, forever marked by the truth. Back in the concrete corridor, the noise of the party faded, replaced by the sterile hum of the service area. Mr. Arlo led her to a quiet corner, his face grim. Was it worth it? He asked, his voice low. It wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question. Chicago looked at him, the man who had delivered the severance check, the loyal soldier of the man who had betrayed her. She thought of the eviction notice, the lonely nights, the fear for her child's future. Then she thought of the look on Tristan's face, the shattering of his arrogance. You gave me a check to solve a problem, Mr. Arlo, she said, her voice steady. I just chose a different method of payment. He will acknowledge our son now. Yes, it was worth it. He simply nodded slowly, a complex expression on his face. He escorted her to the exit, not as a criminal, but as someone who had won a war he hadn't understood he was fighting in. As she stepped out into the humid night air, the cool breeze on her face felt like freedom. She hadn't just gate-crashed a party. She had reclaimed her story. The sound of sirens in the distance was growing, but she wasn't afraid. The explosion was over. Now came the fallout. The explosion had been deafening, a spectacle of public humiliation that had brought a dynasty to its knees. But the aftermath, Chicago discovered, was a strange and echoing silence. The taxi ride from the gilded prison of the Reverie Saigon back to her fourth-floor walk-up felt like traversing dimensions. The adrenaline that had turned her spine to steel began to dissolve, leaving a profound, bone-deep weariness in its place. Each bump in the road, each traffic light was a jolt back to a reality she had just irrevocably altered. She paid the driver with trembling hands, her key fumbling at the lock to her building as if it belonged to a stranger. Inside her apartment, the silence she had left behind hours ago rushed back in to greet her. But it was different now. It was no longer the He-Daniel silence of despair, but the electric humming silence of a world holding its breath. She sank onto her lumpy sofa, her body finally succumbing to the immense strain, and laid a protective hand on her belly. "We did it, little one. We made them listen." Her first call was to Aurelie. Her friend picked up on the first ring. "Chicago. I've been calling you 100 times. Turn on your phone. The internet it's on fire. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm home," Chicago said, her voice raspy. "I'm safe." 20 minutes later, Aurelie burst through the door, her face a mask of terror, awe, and manic excitement. She held up her phone, the screen glowing with dozens of notifications. "You're everywhere. #Tran View Cake Scandal. Billionaire baby bomb. They're calling you the angel of justice on some forums and a vengeful homewrecker on others. Oh, Chicago, you actually did it." Together they huddled in the dim light of the apartment, watching the story unfold on Aurelie's phone. Grainy footage, shot from a dozen different angles, showed it all her calm approach. The clatter of the dropped knife, the slap of the edible paper onto the pristine cake. They watched Isabel's shriek, the thrown ring skittering across the floor, the apoplectic rage on the face of Tristan's father. It felt surreal, like watching a movie of someone else's life. The woman on the screen looked so fearless, so certain. Chicago didn't feel fearless now. She felt fragile, exposed, and terrifyingly alone. Meanwhile, in the ruined grand ballroom of the Reverie, Tristan Adru was living through the longest 10 minutes of his life. The moment Chicago was escorted out, the dam of polite society broke. His father, the formidable Chairman Tran, had grabbed his arm in a vice-like grip, his knuckles white. "You fool." The old man had hissed, his voice a low growl of pure fury, shielded from the nearest guests by a wall of security. "You arrogant, careless fool, I warned you about fraternizing with nobodies. I told you to handle it. A check wasn't enough for this one, was it? You let a piece of street trash humiliate this family and sink a 50 trillion dong alliance." Isabel's parents, the Lee family, were already being ushered out a side exit by their own security, their faces carved from ice. Mr. Lair had given Tristan a single look of utter contempt that was more devastating than any blow. The merger, the 5-year plan, the dynasty. It was all ash. Tristan stood there mute as his father berated him. The insults washed over him, meaningless noise against the roaring in his ears. All he could see was the look in Chicago's eyes. It wasn't the look of a gold digger. It was the look of a woman with nothing left to lose, a woman he had pushed into a corner until she had no choice but to bite. He had underestimated her, not just her resolve, but the depth of the wound he had inflicted. And in front of his entire world, she had shown him the cost. The following days were a state of siege. A swarm of reporters and paparazzi descended upon Chicago's building, their long-lensed cameras pointed at her windows like sniper rifles. She became a prisoner in her own home, the flashes of cameras punctuating her nights. O'Reilly became her lifeline, her provisioner, her fierce guardian at the gate, fending off reporters with a string of creative and highly effective insults. The Adru Corporation enacted a strategy of absolute silence. Their PR machine, usually so quick to spin any negative press, was dormant. It was a calculated move, Chicago knew. They were waiting, letting the initial emotional furor die down, hoping the public would grow bored. They were likely digging into her past, searching for any scrap of dirt they could use to discredit her when they finally launched their counterattack. The silence was not peace. It was the drawing back of a catapult. In the solitude of her apartment, with the noise of the world buzzing outside Chicago, had moments of crippling doubt. Had she gone too far? Had she ruined her child's life before it had even begun by making him the center of a public scandal? She would pace the small floor, her hands twisting in her lap, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. But then the baby would kick a small, strong, insistent reminder of why she had done it. She had done it for him. To give him a name, a truth, a future that wasn't dependent on a secret shame. And with that thought, her resolve would harden once more. The turning point arrived exactly 1 week after the gala. It wasn't a process server with a lawsuit, but a sleek professional courier delivering a thick cream-colored envelope. O'Reilly, who had intercepted it downstairs, held it as if it were radioactive. "It's from Vaux and Associates," she whispered, her eyes wide. "They're the sharks, Chicago. The most expensive, most ruthless corporate lawyers in the country. This is it." Chicago's blood ran cold. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. But the letter inside was not the declaration of war she expected. It was an offer of alliance, a shield. It offered the firm's full pro bono services to secure her and her child's future, funded by an anonymous client with a vested interest in the well-being of the next generation of the Adru family. "It's a trap," O'Reilly said instantly. "A rival of Tristan's wanting to use you and the baby as a pawn in their corporate games." But Chicago wasn't so sure. She thought of the dynamics she had witnessed. A domineering patriarch, a son who was both a prince and a prisoner, and a mother who was perpetually, silently in the background. Who else would care about the well-being of a Adru grandchild with such fierce anonymity? Her hunch was confirmed at her first meeting with the head of the firm's family law division. A woman named Ms. Daniel was a force of nature in a silk suit. Her office, overlooking the city from a high floor, was minimalist and immaculate. She exuded an aura of calm, lethal competence. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The Adru family's primary strategy would have been to paint you as an unstable, blackmailing gold digger. Ms. Daniel stated, her voice crisp. They would have buried you in legal fees, subpoenaed your friends, your family, your elementary school records, looking for any inconsistency to destroy your credibility. They expected you to be alone and scared. They did not expect you to have assault. Daniel then explained that their anonymous benefactor had watched the rise of Chairman Tran for 30 years, had seen his ruthlessness poison his own son and corrupt the family's name. The scandal was not just a crisis, but an opportunity. An opportunity to introduce a new variable into the Adru equation, one that the chairman couldn't control. A grandson whose rights were protected by ironclad law, not by the whims of a tyrant. Then she slid a small, simple handwritten note across the polished desk. "Our client asked me to give you this personally." The handwriting was an elegant feminine script. "My husband only understands power. You have shown him what it is. Now let us secure my grandson's future. It was unsigned, but it was everything. Tristan's mother, the silent queen of the Adru dynasty, had chosen her side. Chicago felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her. She was not alone. In the heart of her enemy's fortress, she had found the most powerful ally imaginable. With the backing of Vaux and Associates, the entire dynamic shifted. Ms. Daniel made the first move, sending a single polite letter to the Adru legal team, requesting a meeting to formalize the paternity and establish a comprehensive support agreement for the child. The letter was a masterpiece of understated threat, its subtext clear. We have the proof, we have the resources, and we have the will. You can do this the easy way, or you can do this the bloody way in front of every news camera in Asia. The response was immediate. Tristan agreed to a meeting. It took place in a neutral conference room at Ms. Daniel's firm. Chicago, dressed in a simple but dignified maternity dress, felt a sense of calm control she hadn't felt in months. When Tristan walked in, flanked by his own stone-faced lawyer, she barely recognized him. The swagger was gone. The charismatic aura had collapsed inward. He looked tired, defeated, and haunted. He sat opposite her, his gaze fixed on the grain of the wood table, unable to meet her eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was the same question from that first day, but this time it was not a dismissal, but a plea. Chicago took a breath, Ms. Daniel a silent, reassuring presence beside her. "I want you to know, Tristan," she began, her voice soft but clear, "that I did love you. I believed in the future you sold me. When you threw me away, you didn't just break my heart. You tried to negate my existence and that of our child. The Gala wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. It was the only way to make you see us." His lawyer started to speak, but Tristan raised a hand, silencing him. He finally looked up, and in his eyes she saw not anger, but a deep, cavernous shame. Ms. Daniel took over her tone, all business. She laid out the terms not as requests, but as non-negotiable conditions. First, the creation of the Farah Trust, an independently managed, irrevocable fund for their son that would make him financially independent for life. Second, Tristan's immediate and public acknowledgement of paternity. His lawyer nodded. These terms were expected, but the final demand was the one that landed like a physical blow. Furthermore, Ms. Daniel stated, her eyes fixed on Tristan, Ms. Chicago will retain sole and full legal and physical custody of their son. You will have no automatic parental rights. Tristan's head snapped up. "No," he said, the first spark of his old fire returning. "He is my son. I have a right you abdicated when you sent Mr. Arlo with a severance check." Chicago cut in, her voice unwavering. "This isn't to punish you, Tristan. It is to protect him. I will not have my son raised in the shadow of your father. I will not have him taught that love is a transaction and loyalty is a commodity. He will be raised with compassion and integrity. He will know his father if and when he chooses to, and only if you prove yourself to be a positive presence in his life. His connection to you will be a choice, not a chain." The fight drained out of him as quickly as it had appeared. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and perhaps for the first time he saw the woman he had wronged not as a problem, but as a mother protecting her child from the very world that had broken him. He slumped in his chair and gave a single defeated nod. The contracts were signed. The war was over. In the following weeks, Chicago's life transformed. She moved into a bright, spacious apartment in a secure building a world away from the precarious walk-up. The first major deposit into her bank account wasn't from Tristan, but from a gallery in Singapore which had purchased her entire back catalogue for an astonishing sum, brokered by a private art consultant who was undoubtedly Miss Daniel. The story attached to her name, the scandal that was meant to destroy her, had instead made her one of the most talked-about artists in Southeast Asia. 3 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy. She held him in her arms, marveling at his tiny, perfect fingers. She named him Kien, persistent, strong, a promise. Her days found a new, peaceful rhythm, the rhythm of feeding and sleeping of a baby's first smile. In her sunlit studio, she began to paint again, not with the desperation of before, but with a newfound power. Her canvases were bold, filled with color and life-telling stories of resilience and hope. Her masterpiece was a large lacquer panel titled The Unveiling, a swirling abstract of gold leaf and crushed eggshell on a black background, suggesting a single defiant truth shining in an overwhelming darkness. It was the story of her life, and it was the most honest thing she had ever created. One afternoon, as Kien slept peacefully in a bassinet beside her, Chicago stood before her work, a dab of paint on her cheek. She thought of the man in the velvet tuxedo, the magnificent cake, and the world she had set on fire. She had walked into the lion's den, pregnant and terrified. She emerged a mother, a celebrated artist, and the sovereign ruler of her own small, happy kingdom. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something far more real and infinitely more precious. It was a future she had built with her own 2 hands. Chicago's journey wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. She reclaimed her dignity, her power, and most importantly, her son's future from a man who thought he could simply write them off. Her story is a powerful reminder that truth wielded with courage can be the great equalizer capable of toppling even the most formidable empires. It shows that sometimes the most dramatic act is simply demanding to be seen and heard. What did you think of Chicago's incredible act of defiance? Was she a hero, or did she go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
A man at the pinnacle of wealth and power, a wife at home, carrying his child, and a glamorous mistress stealing the spotlight. But what happens when greed and betrayal collide at the very moment new life is meant to be celebrated? In a shocking twist that rocked high society circles, billionaire mogul Victor Harrington chose to whisk his mistress away on a secret baby moon, leaving his pregnant wife, Eleanor, behind. Little did he know that one impulsive decision would unravel a carefully built empire overnight. Brace yourself for a tale of lavish lifestyles, boardroom betrayals, and one pregnant woman's brilliant revenge. Victor Harrington was the kind of man who seemed destined for opulence from birth. Born into a wealthy family in Greenwich, Connecticut, he'd possessed an effortless charm and ambition that made him a force to be reckoned with even before he earned his MBA from Harvard Business School. People close to him said he was unstoppable, a man with the cunning of a Wall Street wolf and the charm of a Hollywood star. He had cut deals in the early days. Alongside mentors who boasted legendary names, he once studied an investment portfolio under Warren Buffett's guidance at a Berkshire Hathaway internship, followed by an immersive executive program at Tesla University, where he brushed shoulders with Elon Musk. By the time he was 30, he had built Harrington Industries into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. By the time he was 40, he was on the prestigious Forbes billionaires list. Eleanor Davenport, soon to be Eleanor Harrington, first met Victor at a charity gala in Manhattan. Although her family was old money, they didn't flaunt it as visibly as the nouveau riche. She was a rising star in the philanthropic world, championing social justice causes, and her quiet grace drew Victor toward her like a magnet. The marriage was a match that made the front page of society magazines, promising to unite two powerful families in a union of wealth, influence, and mutual respect. For a long while, their life was the epitome of gilded harmony. They graced galas, inaugurated libraries, shook hands with political leaders, and jetted off to the French Riviera for impromptu vacations. Their future shone as bright as the diamond on Eleanor's left hand. But even the sturdiest empires can hide cracks. Unbeknownst to Eleanor, cracks were forming behind the scenes at Harrington Industries. Victor had an undeniable appetite for success, for excitement, and for women. When he met Bianca Suarez at a high-level conference in Dubai, it started as an innocent flirtation. She was an emerging media consultant, with her own brand of allure, mysterious, witty, and dangerously ambitious. If anyone had told Victor he was playing with fire, he would have laughed it off. After all, he was Victor Harrington, untouchable, unstoppable. But sometimes the most disastrous events start with just a spark. Over months, lunches turned into dinners, and dinners turned into clandestine weekends in exclusive resorts. Bianca introduced him to the kind of escapades he'd never even allowed himself to dream about before. While Eleanor was 3 months pregnant, carefully nurturing the next heir to the Harrington fortune, Victor found himself dancing intimately with his mistress under the shimmering skyline of Dubai, uncertain whether the rapid beating of his heart was excitement or guilt. Bianca didn't want to be a mere fling. She was calculated. She saw in Victor a chance to climb the social and financial ladder faster than any route she had previously considered. And so she stoked his ego, commiserated with his frustrations, and dangled the promise of secret passions whenever he seemed restless. If it was money and influence she wanted, Victor was more than willing to shower her with lavish gifts. To him, money was just a resource expendable and easily replenished. At first, he believed he could keep this double life separate from the pristine marriage he had built with Eleanor. His logic was twisted, but clear to him. His wife was his anchor, his old money confidant, who maintained his impeccable social standing. The mistress was a wild indulgence. He could afford a carefully contained adventure. He had no intention of hurting Eleanor, or so he told himself. Unfortunately for Victor, the threads keeping this secret under wraps were about to fray. A confidential tip circulated in the narrow corridors of Manhattan's wealthiest cliques. A society blogger posted an unconfirmed rumor about Victor seen dining with a mysterious brunette at a private suite in the Four Seasons Hotel. Most shrugged it off as an everyday hazard of being rich and famous. False rumors swirl constantly around the extremely wealthy. But there was more to this rumor than idle chatter. For the moment, Victor thought he had it all under control. He was a master juggler, wasn't he? Everything would remain neatly balanced, until it all came crashing down. As Eleanor's belly swelled with the promise of motherhood, her doctors advised a tranquil holiday to alleviate stress and welcome a sense of peace before the baby arrived. Friends whispered about the latest trend, a baby moon, a final romantic getaway for expecting couples. Eleanor secretly hoped Victor would take her somewhere calm, maybe a resort in the Maldives or a private villa in the Amalfi Coast. The dream of strolling white sandy beaches, holding Victor's hand, and relishing in the final moments of pregnancy, bliss danced in her mind. Victor, however, had a different plan entirely, a plan that was breathtakingly audacious and heartless. He decided to treat Bianca to a baby moon instead, using the ruse of an urgent business summit in Bali. For Victor, it was the ultimate indulgence, combine business with pleasure, while his wife rested at home, unaware that her husband was on the other side of the world, sipping cocktails by a turquoise infinity pool with another woman. He arranged it meticulously. He told Eleanor he was swamped with a high-stakes negotiation in Southeast Asia. Supposedly, several billionaire investors, including a silent partner, rumored to be connected with Bernard Arnault's luxury empire, had demanded an in-person meeting to finalize a partnership. The clock was ticking, he claimed. If he didn't fly out immediately, Harrington Industries risked missing a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. Concerned and weary, Eleanor kissed him goodbye, placing her hand gently over her baby bump and whispering, "Please come home safe." Half a globe away, Victor's private jet landed under the scorching Balinese sun. Bianca, exuding confidence in a linen sundress and designer sunglasses, looked every bit the radiant vacationer. It was a world apart from Eleanor's subdued maternity style back in New York. They settled into an exclusive luxury resort, one that boasted private villas ensconced amid lush tropical forests and infinity pools that seemed to spill into the horizon. To Victor, the staff was discreet, the views unparalleled, and the exclusivity absolute, the perfect setting for a forbidden escapade. But even in paradise, there were signs that things could go wrong. Rumors had circulated that a well-known Hollywood actress was staying at the resort. The paparazzi lurking outside with long-lens cameras were determined to snag any sensational shot. Victor, in his arrogance, paid them no mind. He was too busy enjoying lavish seafood dinners, couples spa treatments, and romantic beachside strolls with Bianca. He reasoned that even if a photograph leaked, he had enough influence to squash it. Money talks, and hush money screams, as he liked to say. What he didn't anticipate was that a local journalist working part-time as a bartender recognized him immediately. The journalist, named Ayu Priyanka, was a savvy freelance reporter. She knew the difference between professional business summit behavior and lovers on a secret holiday. Intrigued, she discreetly snapped a few photographs with her phone, capturing Victor and Bianca laughing over a candle-lit dinner. At first, Ayu weighed the potential consequences. Could these pictures be valuable enough to lead to a groundbreaking story in an international tabloid? Possibly. But first, she needed more solid proof, a narrative that went beyond just two people enjoying a vacation. While Victor reveled in the illusions of a perfect getaway, Eleanor was left to manage her pregnancy in New York, dealing with morning sickness doctor's appointments, and the creeping suspicion that her husband's voice over the phone sounded distant, disconnected. She found herself lying awake at night, staring at the vaulted ceiling of their penthouse, feeling a cold emptiness in their once warm bed. Something was terribly off, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Her mother, Cecilia Davenport, urged her to rest and trust in Victor's dedication to their growing family. After all, he was a busy billionaire. He had always been a bit distant when major deals were on the line. The seeds of betrayal had been planted. If Victor had known the destructive potential of this trip, he might have turned the jet around before it even left the tarmac in New York. But he was blinded by Bianca's enchantments and his own audacity. Each day in Bali heightened his recklessness. He even posted a cryptic Instagram photo of palm trees and a hidden silhouette, an attempt at being clever. Inadvertently, that single post gave watchers enough clues to confirm his exact location. The stage was set for a grand reveal. The baby moon that should have belonged to Eleanor was turning into a ticking time bomb. Sooner or later, a photo or rumor would slip through the cracks, and the moment it did, it would detonate not just Victor's marriage, but potentially the entire foundation of Harrington Industries. In the days following Victor's departure, Eleanor tried to distract herself with philanthropic work. She immersed herself in a high-profile hospital fundraiser hosted at the New York Public Library, the same halls once graced by the likes of Michael Bloomberg and philanthropic luminaries from across the nation. Yet even as she stood at the podium, acknowledging donations and delivering heartfelt speeches, an unsettling feeling gnawed at her. It was during one of these fundraisers that Eleanor bumped into her old friend, Serena Marshall, a well-connected socialite and gossip connoisseur. They embraced warmly, then retreated to a corner table where Serena's voice dropped to a whisper. "Ellie, dear, have you heard anything odd about Victor lately?" Eleanor bristled at the tone, feeling a pang of unease. She mustered a soft laugh, trying to brush off any concerns. "Funny you should ask," Eleanor replied. "He's in Bali, urgent business. Hasn't been easy on me, but you know how these deals are." Serena looked at her sympathetically, but her eyes flashed with alarm. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice further. "I heard something from a contact in Singapore. Someone said they saw Victor with a woman named Bianca Suarez, apparently a rising star in media consulting. And they weren't exactly at a boardroom table." Eleanor's heart lurched. She struggled to maintain her composure, her mind racing with possibilities. Could this be a misunderstanding? A smear attempt by a competitor? She had known Victor for years, had believed in his loyalty, though she was aware of his love for excitement. She forced a polite smile, dismissing the rumors. "I'm sure it's some confusion. You know how gossip can get twisted." Serena nodded, but the shadow in her eyes spoke volumes. "Just keep your eyes open, Ellie. If you need help, you know where to find me." That night, alone in her penthouse, Eleanor found her thoughts spiraling. She recalled the nights Victor had come home, late, the hush-hush phone calls, the vague business dinners. She scrolled through social media, scanning for clues, anything to confirm or debunk the rumors. Eventually, she stumbled upon Victor's cryptic Instagram post, palm trees in the background, a silhouette that looked suspiciously feminine. A flood of emotions overtook her. She ran to the bathroom, tears mixing with waves of nausea from her pregnancy. The baby felt her turmoil kicking inside her womb, a reminder of why she had to maintain her composure. Meanwhile, half a world away, Victor's lavish romance continued unabated. He lounged with Bianca in a cabana overlooking the ocean. They talked about launching new philanthropic initiatives, ironically enough, under Bianca's name, funded by Victor's bottomless resources. Bianca was adept at shaping narratives guiding Victor's public image. "Picture this," she said, leaning forward with sparkling eyes. "We frame you as a forward-thinking businessman who invests in youth-oriented media projects across Asia. You'll expand your market reach and look good doing it. I can even help you with the contacts and PR." Victor, enthralled, listened intently. He considered Bianca not just a lover, but a strategic mind who understood branding in a way that could amplify Harrington Industries' global presence. In his mind, he was weaving a dream, a future where he could maintain a public marriage with Eleanor, keep control of his empire, and quietly enjoy a partnership with Bianca that would catapult them both to unprecedented heights. But the cracks in that dream were starting to show. On the third day of their business trip, Victor received a text from one of his board members, Jackson Wolfe, an old friend who had initially introduced him to some of his earliest investors. The text was direct: "Call me. Urgent. Concern about rumors." Victor paled as he read the message. Could it be? but he shrugged it off. Board members worry about everything from stock fluctuation to media gossip. Still, the knot in his stomach tightened. Jackson, however, knew something that Victor didn't news was spreading in hush-hush financial circles, that the Harrington brand was vulnerable. Pioneering investors disliked uncertainty. If the rumors of Victor's scandal went public, it could undermine negotiations, spook shareholders, and create chaos. Handle it before it blows up, Jackson's text concluded. Yet even that warning didn't shake Victor enough to abandon his tryst. He rationalized that he would handle the fallout once he returned to New York. He was Victor Harrington, after all, a man who had charmed senators out, negotiated cunning tycoons, and turned entire markets on their heads with a single announcement. A rumor or two wouldn't bring him down. Across the ocean, Eleanor was wrestling with growing doubts. She paced the penthouse, replaying every suspicious detail of the past months. Could Victor really be that brazen to take another woman on the very trip meant for them? She didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was mounting. She decided to call an old college acquaintance, Damien Cho, a private investigator who specialized in high-profile cases. "Damien," she began, her voice trembling, I need you to look into something." Discreetly. Eleanor's resolution to seek the truth was the first step toward unraveling Victor's carefully woven tapestry of lies. But it wouldn't stop there. Even she didn't realize yet that once she discovered what was truly happening, her response would be nothing short of a coup, one that would leave Victor's empire trembling at her feet. Damien Cho worked fast. He was an expert in navigating the hidden underbelly of high society scandals. Having once been hired to investigate the suspicious affairs of an actual European prince, this job was par for the course, but it carried a personal element. He knew Eleanor from her days volunteering at a local community center. He respected her warmth, her dedication. And so, when Eleanor asked for his help, he pledged to handle the matter personally. He first followed the breadcrumbs online, examining social media check-ins, cross-referencing flight logs from Teterboro Airport, where Victor often chartered private jets, combing through paparazzi shots of Indonesian resorts. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Damien discreetly messaged contacts in Bali, among them a local stringer for an American tabloid, who confirmed that a wealthy American named Victor Harrington had been spotted with a woman who was decidedly not pregnant. As the puzzle pieces fell into place, Damien's chest tightened with an uneasy sense of foreboding. This wasn't just a case of a random affair. The stakes were colossal. The Harrington name carried weight in corporate boardrooms across the globe, and any scandal could rock markets and ripple through philanthropic circles. The next step was deciding how to deliver the news to Eleanor without breaking her heart entirely. Meanwhile, Eleanor found daily life increasingly difficult. She attended obstetric appointments alone, feigning a smile when the doctor asked about Victor's whereabouts. Her mother noticed the change in her demeanor. "Ellie, darling, you look so tired. Is everything all right?" Eleanor shook her head, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I just need some rest, Mum. I'll be okay." But the moment Cecilia left, Eleanor gave in to sobs, tears that combined heartbreak with a fierce determination. She had a baby to protect, and she would not allow uncertainty to linger. When Damien finally presented his findings, documented photos, flight logs, even a snippet of a conversation recorded by a local resort worker, Eleanor felt both devastation and a strange, cold clarity. She stared at the evidence in stony silence. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, had chosen to spend precious days in paradise with another woman, parading their affair so openly that it had already begun to leak in social circles. But heartbreak wasn't the only emotion coursing through Eleanor. A sense of betrayal so profound that it threatened to consume her was tempered by the resilience her family had instilled in her. The Davenport lineage was filled with strong, sharp-witted individuals, some who had weathered financial crises, others who had surmounted personal tragedies. Eleanor carried that legacy in her veins. If Victor wanted to toy with her trust, she would answer in a way that made him regret underestimating her. She quietly called her personal attorney, Simone Gold, a formidable woman with an impeccable track record in corporate law. Simone, Eleanor said softly, "I need to talk about my shares in Harrington Industries and what I might do with them if circumstances change." That phone call set off a chain of events that would reshape the corporate landscape of Harrington Industries. In an ironclad prenuptial agreement, a document Victor insisted on, there was a clause that ironically granted Eleanor a significant stake in the company if Victor ever breached certain moral turpitude conditions. At the time, neither had expected it to be relevant. After all, it was standard protective language in high society marriages to discourage reckless behavior. Now that clause became Eleanor's key to a possible coup. Late one evening, Eleanor sat with Simone in a private library. The scene was fit for a secret conspiracy. Thick velvet drapes, mahogany tables, the faint glow of a Tiffany lamp, illuminating piles of legal documents. "We have everything we need if you choose to proceed," Simone stated calmly. "You can call for a vote of no confidence, leveraging your shares, and then move to replace Victor as CEO if you prove a serious breach of conduct that jeopardizes the company." Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaling a shaky breath. He's not just a cheating husband. He's risking the company's reputation. Investors talk. Stocks drop at the mere hint of scandal. The board might push him out to save their own skins. "I just never thought I'd be the one orchestrating this." Simone placed a reassuring hand on Eleanor's. "From my experience, betrayal often forces us into decisions we never thought we'd make. But the best decisions are those made from strength, not spite." Meanwhile, across the world, Victor was blissfully unaware of the legal storm brewing in New York. His only concern was how to spin the rumors swirling around the resort. Bianca, too, was confident. Over dinner one night, she reassured him. "We can craft a PR statement that says you were networking with me for a series of upcoming deals in Southeast Asia. Bring up philanthropic collaborations in local communities, nobody will suspect a thing." Victor nodded in agreement, grateful for her cunning. It never crossed his mind that back home a pregnant Eleanor was on the brink of executing a swift and devastating plan. Simone's phone calls to board members had already begun under the guise of friendly check-ins. She was gathering allies, stoking concerns about Victor's reliability. The board, always protective of its bottom line, listened closely. After all, a scandal at the top could mean bad press, falling stock, or worse. Piece by piece, Eleanor's revolt was forming. She was no longer the timid, heartbroken wife. She was a future mother who refused to let her child inherit the aftermath of a father's betrayal. If Victor wasn't going to be a responsible partner, she would ensure he couldn't take the company down with him. In less than a week, the stage would be set for an explosive board meeting, one that would pit Eleanor's quiet determination against Victor's flamboyant arrogance. Victor returned to New York in a flurry of self-assured triumph, convinced that he had contained any rumors about his secret affair with Bianca. He strolled into his penthouse, expecting to find Eleanor in a subdued but loving mood. Instead, the apartment was cool-hushed. Even the staff seemed unusually tense. Eleanor was sitting in the living room, sipping tea, her eyes distant. The subtle tension in the air pricked at Victor's confidence, but he masked it with a charming grin. "Darling, I'm home," he announced, setting down his luggage. He reached out to kiss her cheek, but she recoiled, her expression revealing the silent storm within. "Where were you, really?" she asked softly, the tremble in her voice betraying her hurt. For a moment, Victor froze his mind, whirling with excuses. "I told you," he began, forcing composure negotiations in Bali. "It was stressful, but—" Stressful, Eleanor interrupted. Her voice rose slightly. "Look at me, Victor." She stood, revealing her swollen belly. "I'm the one who's pregnant with your child alone while you were off entertaining your mistress." Her words reverberated in the elegant living room, echoing amid the hush of the staff. Victor's eyes flickered with panic. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Eleanor, we shouldn't do this in front of—" She cut him off again, the tears in her eyes reflecting both pain and fury. "We shouldn't do this at all, but you left me no choice." With trembling hands, she gathered her coat and purse. "I'll be at my mother's. My attorney will be in touch." Victor felt the world tilt beneath him. "Eleanor, wait. We can talk this through." "You know I'd never—" "I know everything," she hissed, her voice cold as steel. With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, accompanied by 2 discreet bodyguards her mother had insisted she employ. The slamming door reverberated, leaving Victor in a stunned silence that belied the magnitude of the unfolding crisis. The next few days passed in a blur of chaos for Victor. He frantically texted and called Eleanor, but her responses were minimal formal. She refused to meet alone. Then came the calls from the Harrington Industries board members. A special board meeting had been scheduled for the following week. The stated reason: urgent discussions regarding leadership and corporate strategy. The tone of the calls made Victor's stomach drop. There was no cordial small talk, no easy banter. These were men and women who smelled blood in the water. Desperate, Victor reached out to Bianca for comfort. But even she sensed the shifting currents. "We need a plan," she told him, her face pale with concern, during a hushed dinner in a secluded Michelin star restaurant. "You have to get ahead of this. Frame your trip as purely business. Remind them how indispensable you are. Show them your next big project is about to roll out." She offered him PR angles, preparing to rally her media contacts. Yet even Bianca's cunning felt insufficient against the tidal wave Eleanor had set in motion. Behind closed doors, Simone Gold was meeting with Harrington board members, presenting them evidence of Victor's risky behavior and how it jeopardized the company's reputation and future prospects. She skillfully outlined the moral turpitude clause and how it could be invoked to remove him. Meanwhile, Eleanor, hidden away at her mother's estate, tried to steady her emotions and maintain her health for the baby. She found solace in daily visits to her favorite greenhouse on the property, letting the scent of fresh blooms and the vibrancy of life remind her why she was fighting this battle so fiercely. Perhaps the most decisive ally Eleanor gained was Jackson Wolfe, the board member who'd been Victor's close friend. As the scandal threatened to burst into public view, Jackson too found himself cornered by anxious stakeholders and even the press. He'd always admired Victor's brilliance, but he couldn't deny the volatility that was now overshadowing the CEO's leadership. When Eleanor approached him with a personal appeal, asking him to place the company's welfare first, Jackson felt the weight of responsibility. After all, an empire like Harrington Industries didn't revolve around just one man. It had thousands of employees, global partners, and philanthropic obligations. A meltdown at the top could hurt them all. The tension escalated as tabloids began printing speculative articles about Victor's affair. Photos from Bali surfaced online, showing a man who looked suspiciously like Victor Harrington in an intimate embrace with a mystery woman. An onlooker claimed they overheard staff whispering Bianca's name. While some media outlets remained cautious, calling the pictures inconclusive, the digital sphere teemed with rumors. Social media users shared side-by-side comparisons of the man in Bali with official photos of Victor. The avalanche had begun. In an emergency PR move, Victor released a statement through Harrington Industries claiming he had been inspecting potential sites for philanthropic work and that Ms. Bianca Suarez was a consultant assisting in negotiations with local community leaders. The statement was riddled with corporate jargon, and critics pounced on it as an evasive half-truth. The board meeting date approached ominously. Investors whispered about the potential for a shift in leadership. Analysts on financial channels debated the seriousness of the scandal's impact. Share prices wavered slightly, but enough to create nervous chatter. All the while, Victor felt increasingly trapped, his once indomitable confidence shaken to the core. Somewhere behind the scenes, Eleanor steeled herself. She placed a hand on her baby bump, remembering why she needed to see this through. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about securing a future for her child, free from the looming shadow of a father who believed he could treat people as pawns in his personal game. She wanted to protect the legacy that her baby would one day inherit, ensuring it wasn't poisoned by Victor's self-serving choices. When the morning of the board meeting finally arrived, Manhattan buzzed with anticipation. Black SUVs lined up outside Harrington Tower. News vans prowled the streets, hoping for a glimpse of either Victor or Eleanor. Inside the building's executive conference room, the fate of one of the city's most powerful men hung in the balance. And unbeknownst to Victor, Eleanor had spent countless hours meticulously preparing for this moment. On an unseasonably cold spring morning, the towering glass facade of Harrington Tower reflected a bleak, steel-gray sky. Inside the executive conference room on the 59th floor, a series of tense discussions filled the air. Board members took their seats around a polished mahogany table. At the head sat an imposing leather chair reserved for the CEO, a seat that Victor Harrington assumed was unequivocally his. But as the clock neared 9 a.m., the tension in the room crackled with electric intensity. Victor entered shoulders-squared hair, meticulously styled, wearing a custom-tailored suit. He exuded the aura of a man used to control, but a subtle flicker in his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Next to him walked Bianca, meticulously groomed in a business outfit, ready to spin narratives. Her presence alone raised eyebrows. Traditionally, only top executives or board-invited advisors attended these pivotal meetings. Bianca, however, was neither. Whispers erupted as board members exchanged curious looks. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors swung open again. Eleanor stepped inside, supported by her attorney, Simone Gold. Wearing a subdued black dress that discreetly draped her pregnant figure, she moved with quiet, composed determination. A hush fell over the room. Heads turned, and even Victor's practiced poise faltered for an instant. This was the first time he'd seen his wife since she had walked out of the penthouse. She acknowledged the board members with a polite nod, her gaze not lingering too long on Victor. No one missed the significance of her presence, especially because she was still a major shareholder with seats on the board that her Davenport family connections had secured. Simone took a seat beside Eleanor, placing a leather briefcase on the table, the metal clasps glinting under fluorescent lights. The board chair, an elderly statesman named Arthur Norwood, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for attending this extraordinary session. We have urgent matters to discuss regarding Harrington Industries' leadership vision and recent developments in the public sphere." His gaze darted from Victor to Eleanor and back again. "This is a confidential meeting, so I expect the utmost discretion." Victor tried to seize the initiative. Standing, he projected his confident, booming voice. "Before we begin, let me address the swirling rumors. There have been malicious reports in the press about my personal life. I want to assure everyone here that these allegations are blown out of proportion. My trip to Bali was primarily for philanthropic site inspections and negotiations with prospective investors." He gestured toward Bianca. "Ms. Suarez has been an instrumental media consultant, helping me navigate international expansions and philanthropic strategies." Bianca stepped forward, her tone crisp and professional. "I understand the concerns, but I assure you, my partnership with Mr. Harrington is strictly business. We've been discussing a large-scale youth media initiative." Eleanor, calm, yet resolute, interrupted. "That's enough." She rose slowly, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Her voice was steady, resonant with an inner strength. "We're all aware of the photographic evidence. We know the media stories aren't mere fabrications, but the real issue here isn't just a personal indiscretion. It's the risk posed to this company, our company, by this scandal." She glanced around the table, meeting each board member's gaze. "I have proof of how negotiations with certain Asian partners have been compromised by the negative press. Investor confidence is wavering. And this is on top of the moral turpitude clause in Victor's contract." A stunned silence followed. Moral turpitude clauses were rarely mentioned in corporate contexts, but in high-profile marriages that intersected with business holdings, they were sometimes used to protect the company from the detrimental actions of a key figure. Victor's face paled momentarily. He cast a sharp look at Simone, recalling the prenuptial agreement's fine print that he once dismissed as boilerplate. She returned his stare with icy composure. Arthur Norwood cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Harrington, can you elaborate on the severity of these repercussions?" Simone clicked open her briefcase and pulled out neatly organized documents. "Board members here, you'll find data illustrating recent dips in stock value following the Bali scandal leaks. This is paired with the explicit language in the moral turpitude clause that Mr. Harrington personally signed. If certain actions, infidelity-damaging public scandals, put the company at risk, shareholders have the right to demand a revaluation of leadership." Victor jumped to his feet, voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "This is outrageous. You're using our personal issues to stage a corporate coup. You can't do this." Jackson Wolfe spoke up, surprising Victor with the quiet resolve in his voice. "Victor, your name may be on the building, but you're not the sole owner. We all have to safeguard Harrington Industries. The press is already circling. If we lose key investors because of your personal mistakes, thousands of jobs could be at risk, not to mention our philanthropic commitments." He paused, avoiding Victor's gaze. "I'm sorry, old friend, but business is business." The tension reached a fever pitch as a motion was placed on the table. Eleanor, supported by her block of shares and quietly backed by the Davenport family's significant influence, made a formal request for a vote of no confidence in Victor Harrington as CEO. Typically, such measures took weeks to arrange. But the moral turpitude clause, combined with the urgent crisis, allowed an immediate consideration. It was unprecedented, but legal. Victor and Bianca watched in mounting horror as the votes were cast. Old alliances turned shaky. Some board members, who once owed their positions to Victor, now weighed their own survival. The result wasn't even close. A majority sided with Eleanor and Simone's proposal. The motion carried, effectively ousting Victor from the CEO position pending further negotiations regarding his stake and role in the company. Eleanor looked across the table, her eyes moist with a blend of triumph and heartbreak. "Victor, I never wanted it to come to this," she said quietly, "but you forced my hand." Stunned into silence, Victor sank into his chair. Bianca tried to speak, to offer a rebuttal or spin, but her words faltered in the face of the board's overwhelming consensus. The meeting concluded with a swirl of legal procedures. A caretaker CEO would be appointed, with an emergency leadership council to manage day-to-day operations, while a permanent replacement was sought. For all intents and purposes, Victor's reign was over. As people gathered their folders and prepared to leave, an ominous hush filled the room. The downfall of a once mighty empire head had played out in a mere hour. Eleanor, gathering her strength, exited without another word, Simone at her side. In the hallway, the press buzzed, cameras flashing. But Eleanor walked past them, a silent force of composure, stepping into a waiting car that whisked her away. Inside that car, she finally allowed herself to exhale. She gently placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's light kick. A swirl of conflicting emotions flooded her: sorrow, relief, fury, and the faint hope that maybe now the child she carried could one day grow into a legacy untainted by reckless betrayal. Victor had taken a mistress on a baby moon that should have been theirs, but in that betrayal, he had also handed Eleanor the keys to the kingdom. The world of high finance reacted swiftly to the seismic shift at Harrington Industries. Within hours, the news had spread from private trading floors in Hong Kong to business lunches in London. Major outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times dedicated front-page headlines to Victor Harrington's sudden ouster, speculating on the behind-the-scenes drama that led to it. Business analysts on CNBC questioned whether Harrington Industries could maintain its momentum without the larger-than-life charisma of its founder. But in hushed corners of society events and exclusive clubs, the whispers focused on the scandal's personal dimension. Everyone knew that Victor had been unseated, not just by the board, but by the very wife he betrayed while she was pregnant with his child. The story was salacious enough to feed tabloids for weeks, but it also showcased Eleanor's business acumen and unyielding resolve. Where once people saw her as simply Victor's gracious spouse, they now recognized a formidable woman who had deftly used a moral turpitude clause to protect herself and the company. Victor retreated to a penthouse suite at the Carlisle Hotel, a discreet refuge for the city's affluent seeking privacy amid turmoil. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from attorneys, PR managers, and concerned allies. But not all calls were sympathetic. Some were angry investors demanding explanations, and others were from tabloids offering extravagant sums for exclusive interviews. Victor ignored most of them, drowning his sorrows in half-empty whiskey glasses. Bianca hovered around him, attempting to console him. Yet her once firm confidence now wavered as she faced the repercussions of being publicly named as the mistress. Gossip columns buzzed with her name, some labeling her a gold digger who had orchestrated the entire fiasco to boost her media profile. Even legitimate media platforms questioned her credentials, doubting her role as a bona fide consultant. The brand she'd painstakingly built threatened to crumble, and the high-profile connections she once courted grew wary of associating with scandal. She tried to assure Victor that they still had each other, and that it was only a matter of time before they bounced back. But in the pit of his despair, her words rang hollow. Meanwhile, behind the imposing walls of the Davenport estate, Eleanor found herself grappling with mixed emotions. She had succeeded in removing Victor from the company leadership, but the personal cost weighed heavily on her. She was married to a man whose betrayal had shattered her trust. For nights on end, She lay awake, feeling the baby's gentle movements and wondering what kind of future they would have. She consulted with Simone about legal separation, maybe even divorce, but each time she hesitated, mindful of the unborn child who would inevitably link her life to Victor's in some way. While Eleanor wrestled with internal conflicts, corporate maneuvers continued at Harrington Industries. The newly appointed caretaker CEO, Lawrence Porter, a veteran executive from within the company, diligently tried to stabilize investor sentiment. He reached out to longtime partners, reminding them of the company's resilient fundamentals and diversified portfolio. But the stock still dipped further, reflecting the market's anxiety. Even seasoned analysts couldn't discount the intangible influence Victor once held. Lawrence, however, had Eleanor's backing, and Jackson Wolfe's strategic insight. Their combined efforts formed a temporary shield against a total collapse in confidence. In an attempt to turn the tide, Simone advised Eleanor to take a more visible role. "You don't have to be CEO, but your presence will reassure investors," she said gently. "Host a small event. Show your commitment to the company. Let them see that the Harrington brand is intact, anchored by someone with integrity." Eleanor was reluctant, but she recognized the necessity. Against her natural inclination for privacy, she agreed to hold a press conference to address the company's future. Titled "A New Horizon for Harrington Industries," it was carefully orchestrated, tasteful floral arrangements, minimal fanfare, and a succinct message of stability, progress, and renewed commitment to philanthropy. Eleanor spoke for only 10 minutes, but her measured tone and composed demeanor impressed even the cynics. She reiterated the strength of the firm's core businesses and announced a series of philanthropic initiatives focusing on maternal health, an unsubtle nod to her own journey. By the end, the stock saw a modest uptick, a sign that perhaps the market believed Harrington Industries could weather the storm after all. Yet beneath the public facade of a carefully managed transition lay personal entanglements that were far from resolved. Victor watched Eleanor's press conference in his hotel suite, a feeling of muted awe stirring inside him. There she was, the woman he had wronged gracefully, commanding respect from an audience of seasoned journalists and business leaders. He couldn't help but feel a pang of regret, if not for his actions, then for his hubris that had led him here. One evening, as he swirled whiskey in a crystal tumbler, he found his thoughts drifting uncomfortably to the future. Would Eleanor proceed with a divorce? What about the baby? Would he have a place in his child's life? After everything that happened, he knew he had to attempt to fix things, at least in part. Taking a deep breath, he dialed Eleanor's number for the first time since the board meeting. The phone rang and rang until her voicemail picked up. Victor hesitated, then left a quiet message. "Eleanor, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but we need to talk about everything, especially the baby. I'm sorry." He wasn't sure if he expected a reply, but he knew there was no easy path forward without at least confronting the reality of the child they both were responsible for. Outside the Carlyle's windows, the city glistened under a canopy of lights. For the first time in years, Victor Harrington, once the master of the universe, felt entirely unsure of what lay ahead. A week after the historic boardroom coup, Eleanor sat in her mother's sunlit conservatory. Hothouse orchids of every hue framed the glass walls, their vibrant blossoms reminding her that life continued to flourish even in the face of strife. She absent-mindedly rubbed her baby bump, reflecting on the swirl of events that had consumed her life. She was no longer just a wife. She was a major shareholder who had pulled the strings to unseat a billionaire mogul. Yet behind the newfound respect people afforded her lay an ache of betrayal that no corporate victory could mend. Her phone buzzed. Checking it, she found a message from Victor. Please, let's talk. We owe it to ourselves and our child. Eleanor stared at the words, her heart pounding. After everything that had happened, could she face him? But she also knew that ignoring him forever wasn't an option. They had a child to consider, a future that demanded clarity, if not reconciliation. She typed a brief reply, "Tomorrow noon, the Davenport estate. Bring your attorney." It was a formal invitation, suggesting a calm, structured environment. If they were to negotiate the boundaries of their future, the setting would be one Eleanor controlled. Victor arrived the next day wearing a subdued suit that lacked his usual flashiness. Accompanying him was his personal lawyer, a soft-spoken man who looked uncomfortable from the moment they stepped onto the immaculately trimmed lawns. Eleanor greeted them in the estate's library, flanked by Simone Gold. Polite nods were exchanged, but the tension was palpable. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," Victor began, clearing his throat. His voice was subdued, none of the brash confidence that once defined him. "I know I've caused you unbelievable pain, and I'm truly sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to ensure that I'm still part of our child's life." Eleanor studied him, trying to reconcile the man she'd once loved with the broken figure before her. "You made a choice, Victor. More than one choice, over and over, to lie to me. You destroyed the trust we had. But yes, you're still the father of this child." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "I won't deny you the chance to be in our baby's life if you can prove you'll be a responsible parent." Simone nudged a folder across the polished table. "We have some proposed terms," she explained. "For co-parenting, child support, and possibly spousal support, should Eleanor decide to file for divorce. It's all preliminary, but it provides a framework." Victor shot a quick glance at his attorney, who nodded as he skimmed the documents. Before he could respond, Eleanor raised a hand. "But let's be clear. I expect honesty from here on out. Any more deceptions, financial or personal, and you'll lose access. Is that understood?" Swallowing hard, Victor nodded. "I understand." They navigated the intricacies of child support and visitation schedules with the same formality one would use to negotiate a business deal. Simone outlined how they'd handle expenses related to education, healthcare, and even a trust fund for the child's future. Despite the emotional undercurrent, the conversation remained measured, proving that both parties were resolute in doing what was best for the baby. Outside, the day had turned overcast, clouds gathering like silent witnesses to this fateful meeting. When all the legal points had been addressed, an uneasy silence fell. Victor turned to Eleanor, voice trembling with something akin to remorse. "I know a contract can't fix this, but maybe with time." Eleanor's expression was soft, yet cautious. "I don't know if we can rebuild trust, Victor. Right now, my focus is on our child and on stabilizing Harrington Industries. I won't forgive what you did, at least not yet. But for the baby's sake, I'm willing to keep the door to communication open." Victor sighed, relief and sorrow mingling in his eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." After they finished, Simone escorted Victor and his lawyer to the door. Eleanor stayed behind, still seated at the heavy wooden table. The moment the door clicked shut, she buried her face in her hands, a quiet sob breaking through the composure she'd clung to all afternoon. The meeting felt like the formal dissolution of the life she once cherished and the birth of a tentative new arrangement dictated by lawyers and heartbreak. Outside, Victor paused under the estate's grand archway, looking back at the stately manor. He felt an immense sense of loss, of Eleanor, of the carefree world he once believed was his by right. All that remained was the flicker of hope that he might still salvage some shred of dignity or at least fatherhood from the wreckage. As the sun began to set, both of them were left contemplating the precarious path ahead. For Eleanor, there was the daunting task of balancing her new role in the company impending motherhood and the emotional toll of Victor's betrayal. For Victor, a future unspooled that no longer revolved around his unchecked desires. The affair with Bianca had scorched the once verdant life he enjoyed, leaving him to rebuild on whatever scorched earth remained. And standing at the epicenter of it all was a child not yet born, but already shaping the decisions and destinies of the two people who had brought them into this world. 2 months after the boardroom coup, Harrington Industries began to steady under interim CEO Lawrence Porter and Eleanor's quiet but guiding influence. Investor confidence, once shaken, showed signs of recovery. Eleanor, though not officially at the helm, became the moral compass the company sorely needed. Her focus shifted toward green energy in Southeast Asia and philanthropic programs in education and maternal health causes that echoed her personal transformation. While the board rallied behind her strategic insights, Eleanor embraced the final stages of pregnancy in the comfort of the Davenport estate. She and her mother Cecilia carefully prepared the nursery. The estate, adorned with family portraits and fresh blooms, became a sanctuary of reflection and resolve. Eleanor found a strange comfort in her new dual identity, mother-to-be and corporate architect. Victor, meanwhile, lived in quiet exile at the Carlisle Hotel, a far cry from the boardroom he once ruled. He made half-hearted attempts to salvage his image, TV interviews, vague apologies, even an anonymous donation to one of Eleanor's maternal health projects. But the public had moved on. Bianca Suarez had all but disappeared, reportedly in Europe, rebranding her image. Their affair, once blazing with scandal, faded into footnotes in tabloids. Victor's fall was complete. His public charm now rang hollow in empty rooms. Despite all, he still hoped to be part of his unborn child's life. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, he left Eleanor a voicemail. "We need to talk. About the baby, I'm sorry." When Eleanor heard the message, she hesitated, but she knew this conversation was inevitable. Her reply was short and firm. "Tomorrow, noon. Here, bring your attorney." The next day, Victor arrived at the Davenport estate, subdued, accompanied by a lawyer who looked as uncomfortable as the situation warranted. In the library, Simone Gold stood by Eleanor's side, and together they laid out terms, co-parenting, financial responsibilities, and strict boundaries. "I won't deny you access," Eleanor said, her tone even. "But if there's any dishonesty, any more games, you'll lose that right." Victor nodded solemnly. "I understand." They negotiated like business partners rather than former lovers. Once the legal matters were handled, an awkward silence lingered. "Maybe," Victor said, voice low with time. "I'm not ready to talk about forgiveness," Eleanor replied, "but for our child's sake, I'll keep the door open." Weeks later, as autumn deepened, Eleanor went into labor earlier than expected. In the pre-dawn hours, amidst the sterile light of a hospital room, she gave birth to a baby boy. Tears filled her eyes as she held him. "Welcome to the world," she whispered, her voice breaking. Victor arrived hours later. She could have turned him away, but didn't. He entered quietly, awestruck by the sight of their son. "He's perfect," he murmured, his hands trembling as he cradled the child. Eleanor watched, uncertain but composed. Despite everything, their son deserved a future rooted in peace, not bitterness. That moment of shared awe, the only one since their world, fractured, offered a flicker of fragile possibility. The scandal had toppled a billionaire, empowered a betrayed woman, and birthed a new legacy. In this dawn-lit hospital room, the next chapter was just beginning. Thank you for joining me on this tumultuous journey of passion, power, and redemption. From a secret Bali getaway that sparked rumors in the tabloids to a dramatic boardroom coup that shook Harrington Industries, we've witnessed how betrayal and ambition can unravel even the mightiest of empires. Yet in the end, we've also seen how strength, dignity, and a fierce sense of purpose can guide us through the darkest storms. Eleanor emerged not just as a scorned wife, but as a formidable force, one who safeguarded an entire company while preparing to welcome new life into the world.